When the will of the civil servants used to run the government, this tendency somewhat diminished after the gradual democratization
of the polity since 1919. But even after 1937, when Indian ministers took office in the provinces, the administration was virtually run by the civil servants, because of their superior knowledge at the ground level and their informal alliances with the local power structure. However, the gradual Indianization of the civil service also reduced its value as an apparatus of authoritarian rule for the empire and paved the way for a transfer of power. On the other hand, this Indianization made it possible for the continuation of the tradition into the period after independence, 125, when the service only changed its nomenclature into the Indian Administrative Service. Residence and paramountcy. While the steel frame of the Indian civil service ruled British India, about 2/5 of the territory of the Indian under indirect rule of the company and later the crown. Until then indigenous princes ruled, but the British residents and political agents governed. As the nature of the East India Company's function in India changed from commercial to political, the role of the commercial agents, who were placed at the courts of various Indian states to look after the company's trading interests, also transposed into that of residents handling the political relations between the company Raj and the Indian princes. The system of residency, as Michael Fisher has argued, 126 was unique, as it was not to be found in existing European imperial tradition and differed from the Mughal system of vakils. The latter were employed by the client states and Mughal nobility to represent them at the imperial court, and the same system was replicated by the successor states. The residency system involved a redefinition of sovereignty, which was encoded in the new terminology of paramountcy, under which the Indian states were left with domestic sovereignty, while sovereignty beyond their borders lay with the company as the superior imperial power. The actual terms of the subordinate sovereignty of the Indian states varied from case to case, depending on the status of the princes and the circumstances within which treaties with them had been signed. But in effect, British practice often reduced some of these very sovereigns to the de facto status of puppets or virtually confined them within their own palaces. 121 As the company's imperial expansion progressed in India, for reasons of resources both financial and manpower, it preferred to keep many of the Indian states under indirect rule, rather than trying to control and administer them directly. The choice depended on many factors. The states which were not in a position to challenge the military power of the British were left to themselves, those situated in remote comers or on hostile terrains were also left alone, while those that did have little arable land, and therefore limited prospect of revenue returns, held little attraction for direct conquest. The policy was also subjected to various ideological push and pull, responding to conservative pressure for disengagement, aggressive pleas for direct annexation, and pragmatic reasoning for indirect control. The evolution of the residency system therefore underwent various ups and downs. Michael Fisher has identified three distinct phases in the evolution of indirect rule in India until the revolt of 1857. The first phase, 1764 to 97, starts with the initial placement of the company's residence at the courts of Murshidabad, Awadh, and Hyderabad after the Battle of Buxar, 1764. The company's authorities were not yet confident and clear-visioned about its forward policy in India, and so the development of the residency system during this period was halting, and the role of the residents rather restricted and cautious. This initial hesitation was, however, decisively gone in the second phase, 1798 to 1840, which was marked by aggressive expansionism, championed by Lord Wellesley, 1798 to 1805, and his policy of subsidiary alliance. See Chapter 1.3 for details. The role of residents also changed during this period from that of maintaining diplomatic relations to that of indirect control, and in many cases the residents themselves facilitated further territorial expansion. This trend was temporarily halted by the recall of Wellesley and the coming of Lord Cornwallis with a mandate to follow a policy of non-interference. But after his death, British officials in India again embarked on a mission of territorial expansion, and many of the newly conquered territories were left to be indirectly controlled by the residents. This growth went on unabated until 1841, when the abortive Afghan campaign, 1838-42, for the first time failed to establish indirect British rule in Afghanistan. The third phase, 1841-57, therefore, saw the ascendancy of the idea of consolidation, rather than expansion, which had now reached its physical limits in India. During this period, therefore, we find a policy shift towards direct annexation, spearheaded by Lord Dalhousie's forward policies, for example, doctrine of lapse, which saw the takeover of a number of Indian states like Awadh, Jhansi, Nagpur, Satara, and a number of Punjab states. These contributed to the grievances that flared up in the revolt of 1857.129. The revolt of 1857, therefore, constitutes an important watershed in the evolution of British policies towards the Indian states. It was not only diagnosed that the annexation policies had contributed to the revolt, but it was also found that territories under indirect rule were less affected by the disturbances than those under direct rule.